Good evening, folks. A little bit early. Just want to check on the audio and the visual. The AC is working. Yes, it is, Doug. Hope that's not too loud. Let me know. We've got the fan on low there. All right. Well, let me go through the list. Doug Diamond. That's a little dubstep from Doug Diamond. He had nothing to do with it. But this is the Doug Diamond Dubstep Electronic Music Night in honor of the discussion tonight, which will be the electric universe, the model of the electric universe. So I've got George in the chat room and Eileen in nice and early. Dr. Darnell, welcome. Thanks for all those emails. Brenda, your emails as well. And let's see who else is in chat. Lots of people are watching in the background. Tamara, welcome. All right. So, sounds good. Everything's good. Jonathan's in there. You guys will let me know if we have any problems. Okay. Without further ado, let's just roll right into it. Should I announce that you're here?
Oh, I'm in the chat room.
She's in the chat room. She's in the basement in the chat room.
I'm relaxing and unwinding.
Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about benevolent science, of all things. Instead of me hammering on the piled high and deep, or the perhaps he's delusional, I thought we'd be nice to the PhDs out there. While we fly on patch air at 30,000 feet, we're going to take a look at SAFIRE, which is a project that I ran across early 2013. And I had some early conversations with really the progenitor, the idea man behind SAFIRE, Montgomery Childs, and Monty, as he's affectionately known, Monty Childs. And I hope I'm not revealing too much about him, but he is a believer. He is a Christian scientist, engineer, many patents to his name, a long pedigree that is just outstanding in his field. And so we will go through SAFIRE and discuss why that's even relevant in this benevolent discussion we're going to have tonight. And most of you have heard of and are reasonably familiar, some very familiar, with something called fusion technology. Much like the Ignition Center at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California, their laser-driven experiments, and I'll highlight a little bit about that as we go through this. A fusion reactor, so to speak, an ignition facility as it's known, and also ITER. And there are a couple of other smaller projects going on, but fusion is not what we're talking about here tonight. We are talking about a realistic way, much in the flavor of Tesla, let's say, a realistic way of tapping into the plasma of the universe for an unlimited supply of electrical power. Now, this is not strictly Tesla technology. What Monty and his team put together under SAFIRE is not really anything that Tesla put together, although, as I will illustrate to you this evening, in acknowledging the founding fathers, as I like to call them, of the SAFIRE project, dating back around the turn of the 20th century, which did include Tesla. So certainly, because this is an electric model of the universe that SAFIRE is built and based upon, that includes Tesla as well as Faraday and some others. In a nutshell, they're modeling the sun, and I'm saying that in the present tense, not in the future tense. They are literally, presently, modeling the true mechanism of the sun, and we're not talking fusion. We're talking about utilizing the plasma in the universe as the fuel to continue the reaction in the sun to produce the energy that we enjoy here. This is a paradigm changer, and I'm going to read from the source material tonight because I think it's important that we hear their own words. But I had some interesting conversations way back, 2013, 2014, and on up into, I would say, early 2016 conversations with Monty Childs. Now, to toot my own horn and inflate my own ego and show my hubris on my sleeve, I suggested to Monty and his team that they might want to keep an eye out for my 600 cell tetrahedron, the spherical model of the universe that I've presented to you over the years. And that's the teaser. But Monty's a great guy. He does a lot of public speaking at Electric Universe conferences and other conferences that are specific to SAFIRE, and I'll share a little bit of that, but I'll give you the introduction to SAFIRE and what it is, and an introduction to the electric model of the universe, the electric universe in short. And I want to credit the Thunderbolts project because Monty is associated with them. And I shouldn't just say associated, because Wal Thornhill is one of the members of the SAFIRE team, and he is one of the founders of the Thunderbolts project. And as I said, Monty does make presentations at their annual conferences, typically in Phoenix. So I think the best thing for me to do is to let you know that tonight I want to focus on SAFIRE with a little sprinkling of a background on electric model of the universe, EU, not the European Union, and hold the electric model of the universe over for its details, and again specific to what the Thunderbolts project is doing for tomorrow's live stream. So we're going to do a two-part, and all of this is giving you an introduction to the September issue of Entangled magazine. I thought it would be, well, it's long overdue that I do something of the benevolent viewpoint on science. I know in the last live stream there were a couple of questions or comments about, is there anything good in science? In essence, were the comments. And I understand that. I slam science so hard, and I talk about its, ancient mystery schools and mysticism background and that sort of thing. And so I thought, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's try to be balanced in our conversations. And let's give someone a voice, and that's Monty Childs. Now, I have extended an invitation to Monty to join us for a future live stream. I know he's a very busy guy. He just got back from Europe just a few weeks ago from a presentation in the United Kingdom. So I don't know what his schedule is and his availability, but I've extended the invitation, and I sure hope he will at least give us an hour of his time to speak for himself. So today and tomorrow is setting the stage, providing you the background information in the hopes and in anticipation of Monty speaking for himself and giving us the latest update on their experimentation. Now, his laboratory is just outside of Toronto in Canada, and I'm going to see if I can self-invite myself. I used to be on the West Coast in Portland, Oregon. Now that I'm, a stone's throw from Toronto, see if I can self-invite myself over there to the laboratory. And maybe we might even, if I'm allowed to, might even be able to do a live stream from there. And that would be really cool, really cool. Show you guys the inner workings of what I really believe to be the best option humanity has for tapping into the unlimited source of electrical energy that Tesla really was trying to promote and present for free in a completely benevolent move on his part, unlimited electrical energy to mankind. So I offer this to you. What would our life, what would our lives, what would society, what would humanity look like if we had been able to realize through Tesla, without all the selfish greed that had stolen his technology, if that had been implemented, where we would be today? And another guy that I hold very close to Tesla, that you've heard me talk endlessly about, and that's R. Buckminster Fuller. His famous motto, among many, many just incredibly intelligent, prescient, insightful quotes you can find attributed to R. Buckminster Fuller, is his philosophy of doing more with less. I mean, you talk about today sustainability and green and recycling and all of this, discourse that's going on. In the 60s and 70s and up until his death in the 80s, Buckminster Fuller was already talking about doing more with less. And his paradigm change that I've shared with you before is that he didn't ascribe or subscribe to the scarcity model. He viewed the resources of this planet bestowed to us as gifts by God, and that we are to be good shepherds of those gifts, of those physical blessings that God has given us in the form of this earth. He understood there was more than enough, no matter the population. We're now over 7.5 billion people. The scarcity model still does not apply. We have the technologies to do more with less. Just look what computing has been able to accomplish with less. Smaller and smaller chipsets, down now to the literal singular atom scale of chipsets. Transistors, I should say, in the chipsets. Numbering in the billions of transistors on smaller and smaller chipsets. And look at the power of computing today. Yes, I have beat up the whole notion of computing, be it transistor-based or qubit-based, as the beast system, and I'm not diverging away from that. But by way of comparison, look at how much more we are able to accomplish because of computing, which in a sense is doing more with less. We're doing more with less of our time. We're doing more with our resources than we did in the past through computing. And there are many other examples. And this takes me to SAFIRE, because SAFIRE is doing a lot more with a lot less. Typically when there's a discussion of the cosmos and the universe and the Big Bang, there's a discussion of forces that are applied. Well, if you think about the end result of forces being applied, it's usually the sum total is destruction, chaos. What they're finding at SAFIRE is quite the opposite. This is why it's a paradigm changer. With a very small amount of material and a very small amount of energy, as I will illustrate some numbers for you tonight, they are able to realize more power coming out of this device than they are inputting. This is the goal of Lawrence Livermore Laboratories, National Laboratory, their ignition facility, using lasers that are all pointing towards a central spherical target material to implode from all directions, just like it's done with a nuclear warhead, to implode from all directions simultaneously, without any deviation, compressing the target material to such an extent that it will spontaneously ignite. I shouldn't say spontaneously, because there is an input of energy in this process, but it ignites, hence the ignition facility title. And the goal is to realize more output of energy than the energy that is input to initiate the fusion reaction of this target material. SAFIRE's not using any of that. Massive, huge, some of the largest lasers in the world are at Livermore. Not using lasers at SAFIRE. No huge forces being involved. In fact, very little energy and really no force. Really what we're seeing here is harmonics taking place. The harmony of the universe, and I'll share a couple of quotes that I think are just fabulous from Monty. I'll give you a hint. It's akin to what Kathleen was talking about a couple of live streams ago, where she was letting you know we were watching a couple of YouTube videos where some electronic devices, recorders, microphones, and synthesizer, and an amplifier with two electrical pickups on a plant on the leaves, and through the synthesizer being able to hear literally compositions of music produced by a plant. So when you hear me read Monty's statement, his quote, think about that, the harmonics. They're finding symmetry, they're finding balance, they are finding stability and order, not chaos. Science, with their Big Bang, they present the universe as in a state of chaos. It's opposite with what Monty and his team have found. With very little energy, very little material, just a little iron ball, some plasma in a chamber, in a small laboratory, very small funding, $2.2 million was their seed money, principally, just from donation. No huge government grants involved here. Tiny little laboratory, a handful of guys, very much like turn of the 20th century laboratory work. And I applaud Monty and his team. This is just taking the theoretical off the sheet of paper and building it, moving from the theoretical to the experimental, doing empirical science, repeatable science, documented science, logical step-by-step methodical science. And there's no pseudoscience involved here. There are mainstream scientists who will say the electric model of the universe, and thereby association the SAFIRE project, they would put it down into the category of pseudoscience, and it's absolutely not. We are talking about mainstream scientists and engineers at SAFIRE that are hardcore. They're doing legitimate scientific work just like you'd find in any other mainstream laboratory. Same methodologies. Okay? So is that bothering people? Are they hearing it?
Well, Doug was saying, can you scratch that white mic right there just to see if they're hearing from the...
All right, let me check the settings here. All right, I changed it over.
And it still sounds like Logitech.
Yeah. It's just, I know. I got distracted and I didn't turn on the snowball. I apologize. That should sound better now. Okay, well, did they at least hear what I was talking about?
Yeah, they could hear you. It just wasn't. And this was rattling a little
Yeah, I
bit,
know.
so it's better now.
Stupid air conditioner.
I know.
All right, so let's jump in and start off with our scripture for the evening. This is from Genesis, the 4th day, Genesis 1, verses 14 to 19. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the stars as well. What I'm illustrating to you here in the graphic, the image at the top is the anode. And we'll get into defining a few of these things. This is the anode that is inside the chamber, inside the plasma chamber of SAFIRE. It is spherical. So all of those flat earthers out there, you might as well cool your heels, because there's nothing to the flat earth model. It is spherical. You see this represented at the element level, the molecular elemental level. You see this in the cosmos. Okay, this has all been detected, measured, and reproduced. It is all spherical. You see my 600 cell tetrahedron just below it. The tetrahedrons inside this outer perimeter of the sphere, the surface of the sphere, if you will, is a sphere itself inside this cage of tetrahedrons. This represents the replication process underway in the universe that operates so quickly that it appears to be expanding as an explosion. But it's not. It's replication. It's multiplication through division. And in my first conversation with Monty Childs, I said, keep an eye out for this. Well, look what they found. A spherical anode. Yes, they produced it. It's an iron ball. But it could very easily have been destroyed and reshapen. But as I will explain to you as we go along, the spherical shape is maintained, and in fact, the plasma surrounding it takes on what is called a double fold of plasma, but likewise is spherical in its orientation. And the chamber itself is not a sphere. I'll show you a picture of it in just a moment. It's a cylinder. And yet, if we want to call it nature, nature self-assembles into a spherical arrangement of energy and matter. So Monty was pleased, as of course I am pleased, that they are realizing, recognizing my model of the universe as the 600 cell tetrahedron. And I'm not saying they're verbalizing their acknowledgement. What I'm saying is that they are showing graphically in their pictures the same thing that I have presented to you. Okay? Is there a problem?
No.
Down there? Oh, okay.
No.
I thought there was something happening. All right. I'm going to get into reading a couple of excerpts here in a moment, but let me give you the graphics. Let me give you some pictures, just so you get a snapshot of where we're going. You can visualize as I'm doing some reading. This is a CAD drawing, a computer-aided design drawing of the actual chamber itself. What you're seeing over here in blue is the cooling system. It's an air-driven system, but this is the actual chamber where the anode and the cathodes, and we'll define those. So this is Monty here with his toy in the chamber. This is the actual chamber itself. This is the anode with the plasma, spherical plasma double layers surrounding the anode, which is iron. This is a environment that is essentially scrubbed clean over the course of about 3 days in order to remove all of the impurities. Here's the full team. We have Monty up here with his local crew, and here are all the guys, including Wal Thornhill, who are involved. So again, small team, doing incredible paradigm-changing research. And this is purely for the benefit of humanity. Here's Monty giving a presentation back in 2016 at the Electric Universe conference, and that was in Phoenix, and the title was Elegant Simplicity. And again, that's the doing more with less from Buckminster Fuller. Here's the first chamber that they built. It was under construction in this photograph here. Here you can see it down here where they've got the end of it open. A couple of posters from the presentations that he's made, 2017 in Phoenix, and then the science conference just this past July at the University of Bath in the United Kingdom. His co-founder and cohort, oftentimes doing presentations together, is Dr. Michael Claridge. Okay, he's their lead scientist. There is a documentary that is underway that is being produced right now about SAFIRE, and that's what I'm illustrating here with this poster. Really looking forward to that. It's going to be a great story. This graphic here, again, I will include all of these images, including this one, in the September issue of Entangled magazine, so you can read the curriculum vitae of some of these other individuals that are involved on the team. This is the anode. On the right-hand side is an image taken directly from inside the chamber. Now, they do have camera capabilities in the chamber along with other instruments, probes, and the ability to take samples, gas samples, read temperatures, pressures, electrical wattage, resistance, and amperage, all being monitored remotely. So what you're seeing over here on the left-hand side, these little nodules, which I'll get into explaining more of, these are self-produced. They're self-realized on this iron ball, which is the anode, and they self-arrange themselves. This isn't something that was manufactured. This pattern of these nodules is naturally occurring, and they move. They're constantly moving and shifting over the surface of this iron ball. Many of you are familiar with these plasma toys where you can place your hand on the surface of the glass and these little plasma arcs will be attracted. They're grounded to your hand, to your fingers. What I'm showing on the right is a graphical representation, an artist's rendition of a plasmoid in the cosmos. Coming out through one pole is an ion beam, and out the other pole is an electron beam. What we're dealing with in the SAFIRE project primarily are electrons, but this is what naturally occurs in star systems. This is what's been observed by Hubble, the space telescope. Star systems with these two jets, as they're called, and many times this is mistakenly labeled as a black hole, with jets, energy jets coming out and particle jets coming out from two sides of the black hole, when it's nothing even resembling a black hole. There's no gravity that results in this plasmoid. The plasmoid is a naturally occurring process because of the attraction of oppositely charged matter. We're talking electromagnetism here, okay? These are the plasma folds I referred to, and these are actual photographs taken inside the chamber. And these are this is a high temperature environment. But these folds, I'm going to give you a little hint. These folds, these double folds of plasma, they're called, and it is spherical. You're seeing a cross section here. They are in a ball shape. They store energy. They store electrons. Again, this is modeling what's going on inside the sun. And as probes and measuring devices with the sun, by way of satellites, have probed the inner surface of the sun, I think we've been able to penetrate something like 60 kilometers with our instruments into the sun itself. The interesting fact to note about this, the deeper you go towards the core of the sun, the colder it gets. Completely the opposite of what mainstream science puts out. Same thing has been demonstrated in the SAFIRE project. It's actually colder towards the center than it is out where you would call this, with the sun, the photosphere. Okay? So here's the iron ball, the anode, and it's placed on a rod to support it, and this sits in the middle of the chamber. And then they send 1800 watts, very little, 1800 watts of current through this ball. On the right-hand side is a photographic image of the actual ball and the plasma around it with the current flowing. Now it's flowing by way of a cathode and anode setup. And again, this is just another image of that anode from inside the chamber. All right, I'm going to start with that, and I'm going to read you a couple of things. I sent you the links to all of this information. The project report, which is basically a peer-reviewed, if you will, but there are no peers in this area that SAFIRE is involved in, but it's considered to be a peer-reviewed report. And I'd like to read a statement from there. The energy densities being produced by these experiments are far greater than predicted. Energies of this magnitude are found in two other places: the sun's photosphere and nuclear bombs. Let me take this apart. Energy densities. They're supplying to that iron ball in the center of the chamber, that anode, 1800 watts. This is in their initial phase 1. They're in phase 3 now, but in phase 1, they supplied the anode with 1800 watts of electrical power. They were getting readings, what are known as transient discharges. Those are just spikes, energy spikes. Transient discharges of between 2 and 10 million watts. So let's go back to ITER. Let's go back to Livermore's ignition facility. Those two projects where they're trying to produce a sustained fusion reaction where they're getting out more energy than they're putting in to initiate the ignition using lasers. None of that's happening with SAFIRE, as I said in the introduction. They're putting in 1800 watts in SAFIRE. No lasers, no major forces, no hyper extreme pressures. And they're getting out between 2 and 10 million watts. And that was in phase 1. That was in their prototype stage. So let me leap way ahead. Let me project before we get too deep into the details here. The second conversation I had with Monty Childs had to do with, and this was in 2014, had to do with, Monty, can we set up independent, individual SAFIRE chambers to produce electricity for a small community? He said, you know what we could do? With enough funding and enough research and backing from industry, we could put a SAFIRE in every home. Completely safe, no radioactivity. There's no radiation coming from this process. Okay? You could put one of these small SAFIRE It's kind of like my microphone here, this snowball from blue, about that size. Just a little chamber to power the house. Doing more with less. That would radically change our way of life. So I asked Monty, I said, aren't you afraid that, like many other inventors of similar types of programs, that they would wipe you off the planet, off the face of the earth? Because this is disruptive technology. And he said, yeah, we have thought of that. And what we have committed ourselves to is to be the least disruptive as possible, to phase this energy source into the economies of the world. Now, that's very altruistic, that's maybe naive on his part, but I would never call Monty or his team naive about anything. They're a lot smarter than I am, and I know they've thought it through very well. But they have a plan to bring this in and phase it in, so that you don't have millions of people that are thrown out of work in all of the industries that support energy production and energy consumption. So I applaud them for wanting to do that. Part of that, I think, is to keep them from, literally being targets. But I think at the same time, it's very humanistic. It's very benevolent to try to bring this in slowly, because we have such entrenched industries right now that it would hurt a lot of people if you tried to just literally flip the switch and change this overnight. But you could bring this in for regional applications, and then bring it into counties, and then into cities, and then into small communities, and eventually into the home over a period of years. Okay? So let's look at the basic research. We'll start with the basics. I'm reading from their report. This new advancement in plasma science demonstrates a process that consistently creates, contains, and controls the plasma double layers in stable exothermic plasmic reactions. Okay? Exothermic means that it's giving off heat. Exothermic plasma reactions. Although the energies and densities are comparable to the sun's photosphere and nuclear bombs, the data shows no harmful side effects, such as radioactivity. But the science of what is actually happening at the molecular and atomic levels is not yet fully understood. Understanding these reactions will give valuable insight into the ways the sun's atmosphere functions, and provide the foundation by which these energies can be beneficially harnessed. This research will be the top priority of 2018. That's when this report was published. So clearly they're trying to do this for the benefit of humanity. They're not trying to get rich. They're not trying to throw people out of work, as I said. These guys are, this is coming from the heart. Let me put it that way. It's coming from the heart. In 2011, engineer Montgomery Childs was researching photovoltaic energy production systems when he noticed that aspects of the sun's behavior appeared to contradict expected behavior predicted by the standard model of solar physics. Childs discovered the work of a group of scientists investigating the role of electricity in the functioning of the sun's atmosphere. The group had been developing a hypothetical model they called the electric sun. The model is not without precedent. Some of the most illustrious explorers in the history of the sciences have long proposed that electricity plays a much more important role in the heavens than had been acknowledged. People such as Benjamin Franklin, Michael Faraday, James Clerk Maxwell, Sir William Crookes, Christian Birkeland, Nikola Tesla, Irving Langmuir, Hannes Alfvén, to name only a few. Again, refer to this report if you'd like to read through some of this on your own. Montgomery Childs did not immediately find answers to his questions about photovoltaic energy, but he was so intrigued by the possibilities of the electric sun model that it started him on a new line of inquiry. If you want to test something, you have to know it is testable. That's from Monty. Childs conducted a preliminary evaluation to determine if the electric sun model might be testable. He employed the powerful Design of Experiments, DOE, that's not Department of Energy, Design of Experiments methodology. DOE are used throughout industry to illuminate even the most obscure factors responsible for the outcome of a process. This evaluation led Childs to a particular insight. There are billions of stars in our galaxy. Throughout human history, their luminosity, spectral nature, and thermal characteristics have remained relatively constant. A supernova or a pulsar is so rare an event as to be considered an outlier and not that relevant to the overall equation. In industry, something as statistically stable as the stars suggests a relatively simple process. But what would that process be? Exploring the work of William Crookes, Childs was struck by one of Crookes' famous experiments. Crookes placed rubies in a vacuum tube filled with an electrically charged rarefied gas. Although the rubies were not part of the electrical circuit, they mysteriously started to glow. Based on their spectral emissions, it is known that stars differ in their makeup. The electric sun model, Crookes' work, and Childs' DOE statistical analysis indicated it is not of primary importance what a star is made of, only that it interacts electrically with its environment. Now again, tomorrow I'm going to go through the electric model of the universe and explain some of these fundamental understandings of how electricity and magnetism really are responsible for the characteristics of the universe, but we'll deal with that tomorrow. He began to see where the premise of an electric sun model could be boiled down to a fundamental process of charged plasma affecting matter of a different electrical potential. And this is a process that can be created and tested in a lab. So when we talk about electrical potential, that's a difference in the charge state. So let's say the sun is positive and the earth and the plasma around it is negative. You have a difference in their potential. You have a difference that would result in a current, the potential for an electrical current, because one is positive and one is negative. Okay? So let me continue reading here. Childs, when he proposed the model might be empirically tested in the laboratory, Childs was invited to present his ideas at conferences exploring the role of electricity in nature. In 2012, he stressed the fact that he had used the DOE to evaluate the model and it showed that it was, in fact, testable. He also stated that the robust DOE analysis would be used to direct the design of an experimental apparatus to model solar dynamics. After his second presentation at a 2013 conference, a small group of interested people convened and discussed in more detail the possibility of building an apparatus to test the hypothesis. So I'm going to skip through some of this. Again, you can read this on your own. There's some good graphics in here of the sun and explaining how the sun theoretically operates according to mainstream and how SAFIRE differs from that. All right, so benchtop testing, the proof of concept. The sun's atmosphere is a stable plasma existing in the vacuum of space. The SAFIRE apparatus had to both create the plasma and gather and store data about its nature and characteristics. These lab data and observations could then be compared with similar data from actual solar observations. Okay, so again, skipping through some of the basics. It consisted, so now we're talking about the prototype, it consisted of a spherical metal anode which is iron, a variety of interchangeable copper cathodes inside a glass bell jar, pumps to create the vacuum, and an 1800-watt direct current power supply to provide power to the anode. High-speed and still cameras, an oscilloscope, and both an optical and a mass spectrometer would gather data. The prediction was that this rather simple combination of a positively charged anode and a negatively charged environment, which is the plasma and the cathodes, a negatively charged environment would produce a spherical plasma around the anode, and it did just that. So I take that as validation of my 600-cell tetrahedral model of the universe. The first evidence of plasma phenomena were small, round tufts appearing on the surface of the anode. Let me put up a graphic for you that shows that again. Well, I've got it up here. These are what they're describing. Let me jump back here. Okay. The tufts were in constant motion as they sought to maintain an equal distance from one another. Their numbers multiplied as the electric current supplied to the anode increased. When new tufts materialized in an empty space on the anode, all the tufts jostled for an equidistant position from each other. Look at the gold balls in the 600-cell tetrahedron that I have here, this diagram. Okay? That's equivalent. These are the vertices. These are the corner pieces. And look at what they are realizing in the chamber. To me, it's indisputable. With the addition of power to the anode, a spherical plasma shell appeared around the anode, obscuring the tufts. Whether the tufts formed this layer or remained on the anode beneath the dense plasma layer was unknown. More plasma layers soon appeared around the first, forming many onion-like spheres. Each of these spherical shells had a distinct color and rotated independently of the others. These shells are known in the plasma physics community as double layers because they have alternating layers of segregated positive and negative charges. The discovery was made that the plasma double layer shells were self-organizing and worked as high-energy containment fields for the dense plasma within. Now this is where the numbers come in, folks. Also measured were sudden, short-lived releases of high energy. Even though the power supply could only input 1800 watts, the oscilloscope showed transient discharges of 2 million to 10 million watts. In other words, that's the output of the device. Experiments revealed that changing the size of the anode or altering the configuration or shape of the cathode did not produce changes in plasma behavior or structure. But if the size of the anode increased, so did the size of the plasma spheres. In either case, the same nested spherical double-layer shells formed. Now, I don't think they've been able to measure this yet, but what I offered in 2014 to Monty when I was saying, watch for the 600 cell in your chamber, would be the individual replicating tetrahedrons. My prediction is, as their instrumentation and their testing becomes more sophisticated, they are actually going to see images of tetrahedrons, three-dimensional tetrahedrons, within this spherical environment that they've created. Again, they're only at phase 3. What I'm reading to you is phase 1. This phase 1 apparatus had the capability to consistently produce stable plasmas, but 2 issues indicated that it was time to scale up to phase 2. There was a lack of interior space for diagnostic instruments, and the large amount of heat being produced limited run times and thus required the need for cooling systems. All right, so they move on to phase 2, bigger and more data. They have a cylindrical stainless steel chamber. I'm going to jump on through here a little bit. Here's something that's notable. They found that they were dealing with what is known as computational fluid dynamics. Now, fluid dynamics apply to liquid metals. They apply to Liquids, of course, they apply to the movement of gases, and liquid fluid dynamics is also applied to spacecraft and spacecraft as it moves through the atmosphere. So in the chamber, they're applying the same study of fluid dynamics, and they found that the plasma has an independent behavior to that of any gravity, any influence of gravity. Let me look at my notes here real quickly. Something I wanted to read about that. Yeah, gas flow. So in the discussion of fluid dynamics, the gas is slow without thermal buoyancy, meaning the gas is not affected by gravitational force. So you have a situation here where the gas, the plasma gas, is actually not affected by the gravity that otherwise would be pulling on it. It is able to form into its own shape, independent of the influence of gravity, which perhaps would create an egg shape or an oblong shape. Okay? Some of the numbers, the temperatures and things in here and how they manipulate things within the chamber you can read for yourself in the report. I'm not going to take the time to go into those details tonight. Okay, in phase 2, the primary notable achievement of this apparatus is its ability to produce a stable and sustainable plasma, which consists of multiple spherical double layers surrounding the anode. The thing to bear in mind, the big takeaway here, is this is a very stable process. Stability leads to predictability, and predictability leads to applicability. So very much the scenario of placing one of these in every home is realistic. Okay? Any project that attempts to build a working model of the sun will be dealing with high temperatures because plasmas are known to be extremely hot. In an early test to calibrate the telemetry of the gimbal-mounted Langmuir probe, a tungsten wire was attached to the tip. Watching a video of the chamber, an operator maneuvered the probe towards the outermost layer of visible plasma. The plasma was being sustained by an input of 182 watts to the anode, not 1800. That was their maximum. This was when they were first inserting a tungsten probe. Okay, very much like an arc welding probe. They were only running 182 watts. You have light bulbs in your home that have 200 watts and 300 watts. So they're putting 182 watts through the iron anode. And before the tungsten probe even reached what appeared to be the edge of the plasma, the end of the tungsten tip vaporized, and the remaining insulator appeared to melt at 182 watts. So there's something more going on here than simply the energy that they're introducing into the anode. And this has to do with the storing of electrons in the double folds of the plasma itself. Remember the concentric rings of plasma. Let me go put a graphic up for you here. That's not, here we go. So this, again, this is like taking an onion and slicing it in half. This is a cross-section of the spherical plasma, and these are the rings of plasma and the double folds. In these folds are high-energy electrons. You might think of this as like a battery. Okay? We're going to talk about high-energy electrons in just a moment. But this is where this high energy and high heat resulting from the high energy is sourced from. The reason that the tungsten melted was because the plasma itself and the probe was coming into just the outer edge of the spherical ball. It wasn't even penetrating, and it melted. Let me give you a temperature here on tungsten. Tungsten melts at 6,192 degrees Fahrenheit or 3,422 degrees centigrade. They were getting those temperatures and more utilizing only 182.4 watts of electricity, doing a lot more with less. Okay? All right, so I'm skipping through this. They talk about the sun and hydrogen and the gases and all those good things. I'm just giving you the highlights. We may get into some of the details tomorrow. So what does SAFIRE stand for? The acronym, SAFIRE. Stellar Atmospheric Function in Regulation Experiment. It's capable to contain, control, and stabilize high-energy dense plasma. Chemistry changes trace elements not originally found in the iron anode. I'll explain this tomorrow, but they were finding, using their spectrometer, that the anode made of iron somehow was changing into other elements, under elementary fundamental elements from the periodic table. The iron anode did not contain any of these elements, and I'll list those tomorrow, but they were finding a chemical change taking place in the anode itself due to this high energy electron environment. They actually were able to slow the speed of light, and I'll talk about that again tomorrow in terms of ultraviolet and optical light. Variations in the electron density comparable to the photosphere, heliosphere, and nuclear bombs. Plasma double irradiance. In other words, they were getting double the radiance of ultraviolet and visible light. They were getting double the irradiance to the irradiance of the photosphere of the sun. They were doubling the amount of light in their chamber versus the light given off by the sun itself in the photosphere. And they were doing it with 182.4 watts of electricity. Electrical confinement of high energy photons, photon trapping. And the core of SAF is cooler than its surrounding atmosphere, just like the sun itself. So again, there's a lot of details here that I have in my notes I'm not going to share with you tonight. I just wanted to give you a quick overview, a taste of what is going on here, why this is exciting to me. When I think about how this, if it could ever be implemented, if it could be distributed around the world, how this would change everyone's lives, okay? And change it for the better, obviously. Now, let's go to the cosmological. I'm going to change back to the camera so we can talk about this a little bit. Just a little background to the electric model, and I'll elaborate on this tomorrow. We're just going to do kind of a short live stream tonight, so we're not going to take our break at the top of the hour. We're just going to go ahead for another maybe 15 minutes, okay? And I'll be happy to take questions after. I always want to make time for that, so don't feel like I'm rushing you. The simple explanation of the electric model of the universe is that 99% of what science would describe as the vacuum of space is actually comprised of plasma. Okay, that's the big takeaway. The universe is filled with plasma. Let's go back to Tesla. He called plasma the ether. Mainstream science, as I've pointed out many times in the scenario of them speaking out of both sides of their mouth at the same time, saying polar opposite but simultaneous statements. Those being that dark matter and dark energy comprise 85% of the known universe, even though they've never detected it, therefore never measured it, and never, as Monty and his team have done, empirically using the DOE methodology, empirically been able to reproduce dark matter and dark energy in the laboratory. And yet Monty has been able to, with 182 watts up to 1800 watts, been able to demonstrate in the laboratory that plasma fills the universe and is responsible for the mechanisms of the sun. And I'll explain that sun and plasma interaction in just a moment, but has also produced an unpredicted, unexpected benefit, which is a higher output into the 10 million watt transient spiking. It's transient, but it means it can be reproduced and it can be done in a sustainable, stable manner. They could produce millions of watts of energy using this system because they're using the system of the universe. They're using the system of stars. The electric model of the universe essentially is saying that there's a conductive medium that electrons, when we think of electricity, that's the flow of electrons through a conductive medium. Copper wire, aluminum wire, static electricity through the atmosphere, because the atmosphere is a conductive medium. Expand that out into the universe, and the plasma, which has been detected, has been measured, has been empirically reproduced in the laboratory. Therefore, the numbers, due to that repeatability of measurements taken from the cosmos by Hubble and other satellite systems, radio and optical satellite systems, have detected, measured, and therefore led to the reproduction in the laboratory of plasma, resulting in the extrapolation mathematically to 99% of the universe being comprised, being filled with plasma. And through the plasma is a naturally occurring flow of electrons. And when you pass a current, which means electrons, pass a current through a magnetic field, think of a generator, think of a motor, copper windings, which are conductive medium, and you send an electrical current through those copper windings in a generator or a motor, you send a current through the copper windings, and then you rotate that copper winding, that's the armature, okay? Within magnets, it rotates this copper, which is allowing electrons to flow through the copper. That flow of electrons through the magnetic lines of force, the magnetic field of the magnets themselves, either causes a motor to produce work or a generator to generate additional electricity. That's what the universe does. You have something known as Birkeland currents, and longtime listeners and readers of Entangled know about Birkeland currents, and so the team at SAFIRE, and they acknowledged Birkeland in their report. This is essentially what appear in the cosmos, photographed by Hubble, seen by amateur astronomers as well, what looks like DNA, light years in length. DNA, meaning a helix, a double helix. In this case, Birkeland currents are oppositely charged particles, positive and negative, oppositely charged particles that form naturally into that twisted helical configuration as those charged particles conduct through the plasma of the universe. There are Birkeland currents that connect all of our planets in our solar system. There are Birkeland currents between the Earth and the Sun. Birkeland currents can be reproduced in the laboratory, and Birkeland did it himself. Birkeland currents in that, let me put the image up here for you. These, what look like lightning bolts or static discharges. See, you have this isn't SAFIRE, but this is where it looks very similar to SAFIRE. You have the anode in the center, and it's supported by a rod where an electrical current comes up into the anode, and that's positively charged. While outside, the glass sphere is negatively charged, and you have an electrical potential between the positive and the negative. Because of the potential, in other words, the ability for the electrons to move through a conductive medium, which is plasma, to the oppositely charged cathode. In other words, connecting the current, connecting the pathway. These, if you take each of these individually and you were to slice them and look at the end of it, like cutting a rope, in cross-section you would see that double helix of the Birkeland currents. Each one of these fingers, if you will, are Birkeland currents. This is what occurs in the universe. This is the electric model at work right here. Okay? Your hand acts as a cathode, and therefore when you put your fingers on the glass, which itself is the cathode, you're just increasing the number of negatively charged particles that are attracting the positive particles to travel across. Okay? So, let me go back on camera here. With Birkeland currents moving through the universe, you have all of the planets in the solar system electrically connected. And this is leading to the Thunderbolts project, and I will highlight them tomorrow. I'll give you their mission statement, so to speak, from their homepage. But this is where Dave Talbot, whom I had lunch with, I think it was 2014. I had lunch with David Talbot in Portland, Oregon. Very nice gentleman. One of the founders with Wal Thornhill that I mentioned earlier. One of the founders of the Thunderbolts project. And we discussed the scenario that I've put forth many times in public, that possibly one of the applications of the Large Hadron Collider is to electrically connect the Earth in a more substantial way through what I call the plasma conduit. Again, Birkeland currents initiated by the Large Hadron Collider, producing the typical donut-shaped toroidal field, which then leads to the production of, from its center, of the double helix Birkeland currents in a torsion field, and enhancing the electrical connection that this planet already has to Saturn. Because this was the starting point for the Thunderbolts project. The observation of plasma discharges by ancient societies recorded on cave walls around the world. Plasma discharges in the sky, in the heavens, between Saturn and the Earth, because Saturn used to be in a lot closer proximity to Earth. And it is my contention that one of the things that CERN is up to when they get started again in 2026 is to produce a robust plasma conduit of Birkeland currents connecting Earth to Saturn. A two-way pathway, by the way. But that we can talk about tomorrow. Okay? So the universe itself, star systems, between the systems and between stars individually, likewise are electrically connected to one another. there is an electrical communication taking place between all of the heavenly bodies. And this is something that the Thunderbolts project and also Monty and his team at SAFIRE are exploring. This is the very first little baby steps into this area, against the pushback of mainstream science, who does not want to acknowledge the electric model of the universe. They want to continue pushing the gravity model. Many of you have heard me say that I assign the gravity model to Einstein because of relativity, and I assign the electric model to Tesla. A tip of the hat to each of those brilliant men. But it is the gravity model that has resulted in the way our society operates with respect to energy. Energy generation, production, transmission, and the use of it by the end user. Yes, Tesla produced generators and motors, but his intent was to operate those motors by tapping the ether. He even had an electric car in which the motor was directly receiving its energy from the ether, from the plasma. No batteries, no outside generator. So we have been, as a society, as humanity, we've been forced down our throats the Einstein gravity model to explain things and to design our society around. You talk about a big cover-up. It's the cover-up of the electric model of how things work. This is why I'm devoting an entire issue in September to talking about something that I have talked about, but not much of late. And I haven't gone into a great deal of detail in the magazine, but I'm going to do that this time. The last thing I'd like to bring up is associated with Tesla tapping the ether, and that's the sun. What Monty and his team at SAFIRE to this point, and they're at phase 3, have determined, and they pretty much determined it at phase 1, but they're getting more sophisticated as they move along. I think they have 4 phases that they have planned, but it may be beyond that. I'm not sure. I think these are all just prototype phases, and then they want to go to a commercial application after phase 4. But that's based upon a conversation I had a long time ago with Monty. The sun, as modeled in the chamber, is drawing energy from the ether, from the plasma of the universe. Just like in the chamber, it was drawing energy because we have the cathode, which is copper. And it's the fuel source for these prototypes. But they got to the point with phase 3, and I think it happened in phase 2, in fact. It got to the point where the copper providing electrons to the process was consumed. And what the expectation was is once the cathode was consumed, surrounding the plasma with the iron anode in the center of the plasma, once the cathode was consumed, they expected the process to stop, but it didn't. And this is where the big aha moment came. Not only were they getting more energy out in transient discharges into the millions of watts, and not only were they doing more with less, inputting only a maximum of 1800 watts, not only did they have just a small, tiny little model of the sun in their laboratory, but they discovered how the sun was actually operating. Because the sun didn't have copper to draw from as a cathode. And it is not fusion reactions, hydrogen fusion reactions in the core due to massive gravitational attraction, which is the standard model put out by mainstream science. Quite the opposite is happening. There's not the gravitational compressing of material causing a spontaneous fusion reaction, because the core, as I said, is cold relative to the photosphere, which is the visible light and ultraviolet light surrounding the sun. There was no outward fuel source provided by mainstream science to explain how the sun continued to produce energy. But in this little tiny laboratory experiment, the copper cathodes were consumed, and the process in the chamber continued. What they demonstrated, this is the punchline, was that the plasma, the double folds, the double layer, if you will, of plasma, having high energy storage of electrons, the plasma was actually drawing energy from the plasma surrounding the plasma itself in the chamber. Even in a vacuum chamber, even in a chamber that takes them 3 days to evacuate and purify before they start this reaction, the plasma still existed. Yes, they inserted a plasma gas into the chamber, but even beyond the plasma itself, there was a self-sustaining, endless supply of fuel. In essence, this device, I hate to call it a perpetual motion machine, because it's not really a motion machine, but it is a chemical reaction, electrical, heat, plasma, chemical reaction that appears that it could run indefinitely, producing energy because it's drawing from the plasma of the cosmos, thus demonstrating the same mechanism at work in our star, the sun, and stars throughout the known universe, doing the same thing. And with a supply such as 99% of the known universe being made up of plasma, it's inexhaustible. In a human scale, it's inexhaustible. We could have cars and planes and trains and automobiles and all that stuff running with no batteries, no other source of fuel, drawing it from the ether itself. You talk about a massive cover-up. You talk about enslavement of humanity. You talk about creating a serf class to serve the 1%er elite. There it is, folks. So, I'll take questions in the chat room now, and we'll go on. Okay. Thank you for sending me Barry Sutterfield's research. I definitely will read that before tomorrow's live stream, and we'll probably bring it into the discussion. Okay, that's excellent. All right. Okay, so go ahead and highlight your questions in the chat room if you want. If you don't have any questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up a little early this evening. Again, I really just wanted to provide you an overview tonight, and tomorrow be able to give you, what we typically do on Thursdays, the real nuts and bolts sort of classroom discussion. Today's an introductory classroom. It's SAFIRE 101, if you will. But I'm going to bring in Thunderbolts tomorrow and discuss the Golden Age scenario, the mythos of the Golden Age. And not my belief system, but it is what Thunderbolts has taken from Velikovsky's writings. Worlds in Collision was the book, and also be able to provide to you, their updated information on their work and their research. What's important to take away from all of this, I think, again, not only has there been a massive cover-up and enslavement of humanity by not following Tesla, essentially, and the work of many others, is that God has provided to us this gift of unlimited energy that we are just to be good stewards of, as I said at the introduction. And so from a biblical perspective, number one, it should humble us. Think about what it takes to create a star. Man in his hubris thinks he's got it all figured out with quantum mechanics and particle physics. He's got it all figured out. We're going to do the transhumanist thing. We're going to merge monkeys and human DNA and grow organs for humans and get into the whole transhumanism and the Vatican endorsing transhumanism. All of this nonsense. And yet you step back during the day. I'm going to put our scripture up here. God made two lights, the greater light to rule the day. From Genesis 1:14. Give me a break. Can man create the sun? Can man influence the sun? No, obviously. We are to be humbled every time we look at the sun, every time we look at the moon, the light at night, looking at the stars, looking at the cosmos. Many of you have experienced it when you've been able to get out away from the cities and you're out in the country and you are away from the background light, and now the stars come out to the extent that they feel almost like you could reach out and touch them. That's awe-inspiring. That should just humble us right down onto our knees. So I applaud Monty and his team, who, I'm being purposeful here, shedding light on the truth. Okay. Well, I don't see any questions, and again, I'm always respectful of your time. I thank you for spending an hour and a half with me this evening and with my wife, Kathleen, in the chat room. If you think of questions, go ahead between now and tomorrow's live stream. Send me an email, and I'll either answer it or address it or both in the live stream. And I do have a prayer request. I won't say who she is, but she had surgery today, and Kathleen and I prayed yesterday and this morning for her, and we pray for a speedy recovery, of course, 100% recovery. Keep one of our fellow patrons in mind. I don't want to share the details of it because it's just, I think, private. But she had requested prayer from us, and I want to extend that request to the group. We have a good group here, and we take care of each other through prayer and through fellowship. So please pray for her health and speedy recovery and full recovery. If you have any prayer requests, certainly, as she has done, email myself and I will include Kathleen in those. And that's part of what we do here in the fellowship, is to pray for each other. Okay? All right. Well, thank you. God bless, and Lord willing, we'll be back together tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And we'll get deep into the Thunderbolts project, and I'll give you a few more of the statistics on SAFIRE. So thank you, and good evening.